The first kind of relationship I want to talk about are roles. Now, roles are relationships between an object and a temporary function or purpose that that object fulfills. The object plays a role over a limited amount of time. Now, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of things that we may think of as special kinds of people are actually roles. Think of a judge, for example. We tend to think of a judge as being a special kind of person. I know a lot of judges think that, right? They're a special kind of person. But that's not really true. What a judge really is a role that a person plays. A person isn't born a judge as much as somebody may think they were born to be a judge. They weren't. They became a judge at some point, and then at some point they retire and they're no longer a judge. So it's a role somebody plays over a limited amount of time. This is true of things like being a juvenile. You're not a juvenile forever, right? You're a juvenile until you hit a certain age in a certain jurisdiction, and then you stop being a juvenile. Student is another role. You're not a student your whole life. I mean, sometimes in kind of a metaphysical, philosophical way, we go, well, I'm a student of life and I'm always a student, and that's fine and all. But in terms of actually a student who is actively studying at a school, most of us tend to start being a student around kindergarten and end being a student at some point thereafter. Maybe you graduate from high school, maybe you graduate from college, maybe you go on to do graduate school, maybe you finish college and you go and you be an adult for a while who isn't a student, and then after a while you go back to school and you get a degree, and then you go back to being a non-student, things like that. So these are roles people play over a limited amount of time. Now, roles in the NIEM technically point to the objects that are playing them. So it's a one-way referencing. The role points to the object that's playing the role rather than the object pointing to the role. And this allows one object to easily play multiple overlapping roles. Each role can point to the same object. So you can have one object and have several roles all pointing to it. Do you like an example? Good, because I've got an example. When I think of playing roles, I like to think of it as wearing a hat. I mean, actually, our language kind of says that, right? Oh, I'm at work and I wear different hats at work because sometimes I'm playing different roles. And it works really well in my head, at least. I hope it works well in yours. So I like to think of roles as baseball caps. And exactly why baseball caps, we'll see in just a sec. Now consider something like a crime happening, right? You've got different roles that are part of that crime. For example, you've got an enforcement official who was called to the scene of the crime. You've got the victim who was the victim of the crime. And you've got a witness who saw the crime occur, say an assault of some sort. So there's an enforcement official, which is the NIEM language for police officer. There's a victim of the assault, and there was a witness to the assault. Now, these are all roles that would be played by people. They're not special sorts of people. You don't want to be a victim all the time, and you don't want to be a witness all the time, and nobody wants to be a police officer from the moment they're born to the moment they die of old age years after retirement. These are all roles people play. So let's take a look at that. So here's me, and let's say I'm involved in this assault. In fact, let's say I saw the assault. I was a witness to this assault, so I'm wearing the green cap for the witness. I was a witness. I'm playing the role of the witness in terms of this assault. What if the reason I'm one of the witnesses to this assault is that I'm also the victim? I'm the person who was assaulted. Now I'm wearing two hats. I'm wearing both the victim hat and the witness hat for the purposes of this assault that occurred. So I can wear both hats, I can play multiple roles. Nothing wrong with playing multiple roles. But wait, I could also be the officer involved. That's perfectly possible, right? Maybe I'm called to some scene of some crime, and in responding, I myself get assaulted. So I'm the police officer there, the enforcement official, so I'm wearing the blue hat. I'm also the victim, so I'm wearing the red hat, and I'm also a witness to it all, so I'm wearing the green hat. I play all three roles. The NIEM allows for this. It has roles for all of these, roles, and they can all point to me as a person object. So the NIEM handles this very, very smoothly, very capably. But there's more to my baseball cap analogy than just the fact that you can wear multiple hats to signify multiple roles. Roles in the NIEM also hold role-specific information. For example, the police officer hat, the enforcement official, the blue baseball cap, it can hold things that are specific to the role of being an enforcement official. Say, for example, badge identification. Now, this seems a little strange at first because we think of the badge identification as being something specific about that person, but it's really not. It's really about the role that person plays as an enforcement official. Think of it as like a jersey number. Like, for example, Chuck Foreman was number 44 back on the Minnesota Vikings. And the reason I know that is because my dad always thought Chuck Foreman was a slacker. So for some reason, I remember number 44. Or you can say number 10, Fran Tarkenton, whatever you want. But the thing is, 10 is not Fran Tarkenton's number. He doesn't go around suing people for using the number 10. It was his number in the context of being a football player. The same for Chuck Foreman's 44. And I don't know whether Chuck was a slacker or not. I was too young. But 44 is not the number for Chuck Foreman, the person. It's the number for Chuck Foreman playing the role of a football player. So it actually works really well. The badge identification for an enforcement official is really about the role of being an enforcement official. It's not about the person, his or herself. So the idea of a role as a baseball cap works really well because you can flip the cap over and you can toss a badge identification in there. So we've still got the hat analogy going. I really love this analogy. Let's go along to the next role. That would be the role of the victim. So the red baseball cap, signifying the victim, holds information specific to that role of being a victim. For example, the injury that is sustained as part of that assault. So you're a victim, you're injured in that role of being a victim. This isn't, the injury where you stubbed your toe last week. No, this is the injury that you have because you were playing the role of the victim. And so that cap holds the injury object. And then for the witness also has role-specific information. For example, the witness's willingness to testify. That's not their general willingness to testify about all sorts of things. No, it's their willingness to testify in the context of the role of the witness to this assault. So it's role-specific information. And just as a baseball cap can hold a ball, roles in the NIEM can also hold chunks of information specific to that role. So I still like the analogy because it works here too. By the way, I once caught a home run ball in a baseball cap, so I know you can catch balls with baseball caps. Oh, but wait, I plan to run this analogy right into the ground. Remember when I said that roles point to the objects playing the role and not the other way around? That still works with baseball caps because baseball caps have bills and bills can point at things. So when I think of roles, I think of baseball caps. I think of people playing multiple roles or even playing a single role as those people wearing a baseball cap. I think of roles as holding role-specific information as those caps turned upside down and the pieces of information as balls inside those caps. And I think of the fact that roles point to the object playing the role as being the bill of the cap pointing to the person who is playing the role. And that's how I remember that roles point to the objects don't point to the roles. So that analogy works right through. Now, you can come up with other ones, and I encourage you to do so, but just in case you just want a pre-made one, this is my favorite analogy for NIEM roles. So far, I've been talking about roles in terms of roles people play, but roles aren't just limited to people in the NIEM. Organizations can also play roles. So you will find roles in the NIEM that can point to organizations playing the role. And sometimes a role can be played by either a person or an organization. Now this is similar to the concept of an entity, and this is why earlier when I talked about entities, I said arguably they would be better done as roles, and I still think that's true. That said, there are already a lot of roles in the NIEM that can be played by either a person or an organization. They contain pointers for both people and organizations, so you can point to either one. And then items can play roles as well. There's a number of roles in the NIEM that are there for items, and that's very flexible. Consider, for example, the concept of a weapon. You don't want to have the weapon as an object. You want to have the concept of a weapon as a role. Why do you want to have that? Because really, what's a weapon? Okay, sure, a gun's a weapon. So if I'm thinking of a gun as a weapon, I'm going to have things like the caliber of the gun, and I don't know how many bullets it has, and whether it fires automatically, and I don't know anything about guns, so I'm making some of this up. But those are all the things you'd want to know about a gun. Well, what if the weapon's a knife? Well, then you probably want to know the length and whether it's double-bladed, and I don't know whether it's hollow-grounded or not, and now I've exhausted my knowledge of knives as well. But now you're thinking, gee, if I want to have a weapon that could be a gun or a knife, then does that mean my weapon object has to have caliber information as well as blade length information? And what if I think of the weapon as being an automobile, which actually happens in the real world? You get people who try to run down somebody else, and the automobile becomes a weapon for the legal purposes of whatever crime they committed in trying to run somebody over with their car as a weapon. So now does my concept of a weapon have to include number of cylinders and horsepower and things like that? It's a lot easier to have the weapon be a role and have that weapon role point to the object that's being used as a weapon. That could be a gun. That could be a knife. That could be an automobile. That could be a hot cup of tea. I mean, seriously, tea's pretty hot when you first make it. I could throw tea at you and use a cup of tea as a weapon. Usually it's a tasty beverage, but you could use it as a weapon. Since the NIEM has roles that can point at items playing the role, any arbitrary item, and let's face it, if you're really creative, you can probably turn almost anything into some sort of a weapon. And the NIEM lets you do that. The NIEM doesn't put weapony constraints on objects. Instead, you have objects that are whatever those objects are, and you have a weapon role that would then point to the object to let you say that this particular object, regardless of what it was used in the role of a weapon.